Colleagues, friends, and people of God, it is great to be church together. Amen? Because I know no other way to begin. We begin in Scripture, an old story for a new time. The Gospel according to Luke, the 5th chapter, beginning at verse 17. One day while Jesus was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal. Just then, some men came carrying a man who was paralyzed on a bed. They were trying to bring him and lay him at the feet of Jesus, but finding no way to bring him in because of the large crowds, they went up on the roof and let him down through the tiles in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven you." Now, I wonder about this faith that Jesus saw. We know many people wanted to be seen by Jesus, touch Jesus, wanted to reach out and actually be touched by Jesus, to be healed by Jesus. But in this old story, we also see 4 men climbing the walls of a house, ripping open the packed dirt or clay tiles with their bare hands, and literally blowing the roof off the place, according to Daniel. All so that they could get to Jesus. Now, I wonder, what are we willing to do to get to Jesus? To get the people of God to hear the words of Jesus? How much faith do we have? Would Jesus look at us and see it? How much faith do we have that God is doing a new thing with our churches? How much trust do we have that God had a plan? God has a plan. God knows the plan, and certainly God has already gone ahead and is guiding us in this plan. God does new things all the time. That doesn't mean that there is no work for us to do. We are both saved by grace and we are called to be his instruments. If God is doing a new thing, we are the instruments of prayer and guidance of that new thing. As we show up to preach and teach and work for justice and develop and grow new faith communities and teach Sunday school and hear a good word and gather in holy spaces where we are all welcome to Christ's table, we might also have to rip the roof off to do the really hard stuff to get to Jesus. I have physically been in over 40 of your churches, our churches, since I stood before you last year, when I promised that I would keep asking, I would keep listening, I would enter into your sacred spaces and into your lives in both good times and the times that you wonder what God is up to. For some, that was because you were starting the Synod's Rural Revival Program. We have practiced and we have tweaked, and with all of the feedback, I'm rolling, but I have to stop, I'm told. I don't think this is smart of them to give me fair time up here on the mic. Seems like a real questionable choice. All right, so how was everyone's lunch? Oh boy. Okay, so how many of our sites do we have physically with us now or virtually? Thank you for the practice. Nice. Somebody run and get my Diet Dr. Pepper.
also in our other 3 locations. So thank you for those of you who are on time and prompt. I typically have a rule not to penalize the prompt, but we are going to penalize you just a little bit by making you wait just a little while for a few more folks to show up. All right. Are we ready to start the broadcast, Ryan? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Welcome back to Plenary Session 2, which is now in progress. Pastor Rebel Hurd serves as our Director for Evangelical Mission. She is a vital part of our Synod staff leadership team. She oversees new mission starts, congregations that have grant dollars for renewal work, cutting-edge ministries that were with young adults and with people in poverty, as well as our anti-racism training and our DEI work. And so we're grateful that she will be bringing a report live from Bemidji. And I turn it over to you, Pastor Rebel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, you are wonderful. We might be having a little bit more fun than the other sites. I'm not sure. Colleagues, friends, and people of God, it is great to be church together. Amen? Because I know no other way to begin, we begin in Scripture. An old story for a new time. The Gospel according to Luke, the 5th chapter, beginning at verse 17. One day while Jesus was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal. Just then some men came carrying a man who was paralyzed on a bed. They were trying to bring him and lay him at the feet of Jesus, but finding no way to bring him in because of the large crowds, they went up the roof and let him in through the tiles in front of Jesus. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven you." Now, I wonder about this faith that Jesus saw. We know many people came to be seen by Jesus, to be touched by Jesus, to reach out and touch his clothes, to be healed by Jesus. But in this old story, that wasn't all we saw. We see 4 men climbing the walls of a house, ripping open the packed dirt and the clay tiles, literally blowing the roof off the place, according to Daniel, to get to Jesus. Now, I wonder, what are we willing to do to get to Jesus? To get the people of God to hear the words of Jesus? How much faith do we have? Would Jesus see it if he looked at us? How much faith do we have that God is doing a new thing with our churches? How much trust do we have that God had a plan, God has a plan, God knows the plan, and most certainly God is going to go ahead of us to lead and guide the plan? God does new things all the time, but that doesn't mean that we have no work to do. We are both saved by God's grace, and we are called to be the instruments of God. If God is doing a new thing, my friends, and we are the instruments, then we get to jump in with prayer and guidance and do a new thing together. As we show up to preach and teach and work for justice and develop and grow faith communities, to teach Sunday school and hear a good word, and gather in holy spaces to welcome all to Christ's table, we must also be willing to rip the roof off and do the really hard stuff to get to Jesus. It has been my honor to physically be in over 40 of your churches. since I stood before you last year. Then and now I promised you that I would keep asking and listening and entering into your sacred spaces and into your lives in both good times and also times when you were wondering what God is up to. For some, this was because you were starting the Synod's Rural Revival program, a program that we have practiced and tweaked, and with feedback from the first several churches, we have practiced and tweaked again until we found common ground that both help us tell the old story and also help us embody a new story in our new mission fields that God has called our churches to be. In Rural Revival, Pastor Melissa Pickering and myself enter in to help develop a framework, a plan that fits your current mission field to move forward in ministry in faithful ways. We focus on 6 different areas. One is spiritual practice, dwelling in God's word, listening to God's Holy Spirit, trusting in God's guiding and abiding in prayer. Assessing, understand your current mission field and needs. Likely, your community, your neighborhood looks different than it did when your church was planted. Think back to that time. What are the current needs of God's people now where you are planted? How can you be genuine to who you are and also be outward thinking to what your neighbors might need, their faith needs, their general life needs, what welcome might look like to them, not you. Stewarding, imagining the sharing of resources with surrounding places of worship and nonprofits and schools, community centers, and neighboring churches. And leading, assessing the possibility of new church leadership models through lay leaders and shared pastoral services and maybe Synod authorized ministers. And equipping, building a plan together with concrete possible next steps, which may include focusing on evangelism or generosity or hospitality. And finally, trusting. This is faithful work that we do together, trusting in God's promised future for the community of faith and the followers of Jesus in this place where you have been planted in your capacity to take the next steps. This is Holy Spirit-driven work, if you can't feel that. For all of us, no matter the size of the church or the money in the bank, all of the things that we just heard on our video from Kara Powell. And because of that, we know that there are others that need to enter in, and maybe rural is something that we need to question and wonder about. Maybe we need to offer up some vitality days where all of our churches can really ask those deep questions. What is my mission field? How do we dig deeper? What are the things? So we are working on some vitality days coming this fall. Please watch for those announcements. And finally, I would be remiss in my duties as DEM if I did not stop talking and say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your mission support that allows us to do the good work. Thank you for being there, for all the generous ways. Truly, it's important work that we do together. And the partnership simply could not happen unless we did. Speaking of our neighbors, I now get to announce the winner of this year's Holy Cow Award. It is based on the generous financial gifts of ELCA World Hunger and Mission Support. And this year, I'm very excited to share that our winners are Calvary Lutheran Church in Perham, Minnesota. You can see on the screen that Pastor Eric Clapp and Pastor Aaron Bovendam graciously received the Holy Cow Award and said they would show it off all year. And before I left the sanctuary, they went and got a tiny little table and put it right up by the altar. So they were not kidding, at least for this weekend. And so thank you so much to them for all of that work. And as we move into our very next thing, we have a wonderful, amazing humans gathering in front of me that you may or may not be able to see. And so I am going to come out here and introduce this lovely panel of humans. I love it when there are children running around. This is good. It's wonderful. Wonderful. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you your panel led by Mission Developer, Pastor Emily Papke Larson. Right on over there, Community Called Grace. Daniel Kirschbaum, who you already heard from over here. And then we have Ashton, Tyler, John, and Tiffany. Thank you so much for your good work.
Thanks, Pastor Rebel, and thanks for rooting us in that scripture. Pastor Rebel and I got to connect. She chose it before she even knew that it's a scripture that I use to ground young adult ministry work in often. And as we think about that ripping the roof off, are we a church that's willing to have our roof ripped open, even if we're not the ones ripping it off? How scary is that for someone to show up at your church by ripping your roof open? So I'm curious, how we might rip some roofs open today. We'll see.
Amen.
We're gonna be asking some questions. All 6 of us will be taking some time to answer some of those questions, but I want to just name what we're not going to do first, which is we're not going to go through all of Dr. Kara's research, although I love Dr. Kara. She's an incredible colleague and partner in the work that we do in the ELCA Churchwide office. We're not going to litmus test all the research on a group of young adults by making us prove that research was correct. So we're not going to go there, but we are going to ask some questions in our own words of each other, have some space to thoughtfully answer those questions, hopefully. And I have the privilege and honor of traveling around often to talk about young adult ministry, and I get a lot of questions that are pretty repetitive sometimes. So we'll name what some of those questions might be. You might imagine that one of them might be like, where are all the young adults, Daniel? That's a question we hear a lot. And we're going to reframe some of those questions into questions that maybe will produce some more helpful answers than asking those questions. They're holy and faithful questions because it comes from a place of yearning, like, where are all the young adults? But I don't know if that question is actually going to help us get to what we're looking for from it. So we're going to do a little bit of reframing. But before we do that, Pastor Emily is going to introduce us to the incredible humans we have up here and a little bit about how this community has gathered.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Daniel. So I'm going to introduce myself, share just a little bit about a community called Grace, and then invite each one of the folks who are up here to introduce themselves also. So my name is Pastor Emily Papke Larson. I use both she and they pronouns. And I want to share a bit about community called Grace, which is a new, well, we could say new-ish ministry in this synod, because we've been around for maybe about 3 years now. I'm kind of actively doing things in our synod for about 2 years now. And we have some regular monthly events that have been just really hopeful and exciting for us that I want to share. And then some new things that are kind of starting to pop up and emerge in our community, because it turns out that one of the things that young and young-ish, I identify as a young-ish adult, want and need and look for are just places of connection, places where you can get together and you can like make some friends, because it is very hard to make friends as an adult. I heard this really funny joke. It was maybe a meme or something that said Jesus' greatest miracle was having 12 close friends in his early 30s, which is true. Not his only miracle, maybe not his greatest. But I mean, I feel that deeply as a young adult. So community called Grace gathers for a few regular events. We do a Pints of Grace pub theology and a Cups of Grace coffee shop theology. Each of those happen once a month. They are generally speaking the same discussion questions, not the same conversation, because they take place in different locations. It was super important for us to add a community meeting place that didn't have anything to do with alcohol. So coffee shop was just as important for us as meeting in our favorite local brew pub. We heard Kara Powell talk a bit about authentic questions and how that's important for young and young-ish adults. And that is one of the things that Cups of Grace and Pints of Grace allows us. We usually start with 1 or 2 discussion questions. And instead of getting to the other 10 I've prepared, we go off on these beautiful tangents where we, solve the world's problems. But we grow closer together, and that's what matters, right? That's where I believe that Jesus shows up and that faith is formed, is when we have those intimate and authentic conversations with each other. We also do Gather. We're part of the ELC's Gather network, which Daniel can share a bit about and has already a bit too. We do a monthly faith and spirituality meeting. Right now we're meeting outside. So for the rest of the summer into September, we are going to meet at Diamond Point Park. We have communion together. We sing a cappella, which is bold and brave of us. We also have one of our fearless musicians up here on our panel. So that's just an awesome opportunity for us to explore what faith and spirituality look like. Sometimes it's a more traditional worship service. Sometimes it will be doing a faith practice like a labyrinth walk. Or maybe something a little bit different. We also have a bunch of other things that we do. We have a book club where we've committed to reading only authors who identify as LGBTQIA2S+, or Black, Indigenous, people of color who are writing about theology. Those are the books that we're interested in reading, because those are not often the voices that get heard or read in some of our more traditional churches. We had a D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, small group that happened for a long time. I just want to say real quick, your vision of D&D from the 1980s and the Satanic Panic. I can't believe I'm bringing up the Satanic Panic in this panel. Not what it is. Not what it is. Beautiful collaborative storytelling game. An opportunity for us to learn how to be in relationship together and solve problems together in super creative ways. And we also have this really fun new group that Ashton is creating for us that is called Filled with Grace. We're going to go out to eat at different restaurants in the area, and again, just build those relationships. So that, along with all kinds of other stuff, right? Volunteering at Pride, showing up at environmental organizations, being a presence in the community. That's what's important for a community called Grace. So all of that being said, I could talk about this for our full 45 minutes. Yeah. So I better pass it on. Please take it away, Teller, if you would share your name, if you're comfortable, your pronouns. And we had come up with a question that we thought would be cool to share. Can't remember what it was.
I got you. We're going to also share a meaning-making activity that we enjoy doing. I'll just name that whole making friends in your 30s thing. A regular question that starts a conversation between young adults is often, what do you do for work? But that's maybe not the most exciting, interesting, or life-giving part of somebody's life. Maybe you can identify with that too. And so we're attempting to shift that language a little bit. So what's a meaning-making activity that you do? Maybe it's your job. Good for you if it is.
I'm Tyler Bublitz. He, him pronouns. I would say hosting the Faith and Science podcast, and everyone should be listening to it. So that's my meaning-making thing.
Just a short commercial there. Thank you.
My name is Tiffany Runquist, she, her pronouns. My meaning-making activity, I guess. I usually always fall back on baking, and not because I'm a woman. I just really love baking. I already have. I love baking bread. Also, I feel like I'm lucky that my meaning-making activity is my job sometimes. I'm an early childhood mental health professional. Talking to kids about feelings gives me life.
Yes. Amen.
My name is John Runquist. I use they, them pronouns. And my meaning-making activity, honestly, is playing video games. I once wrote an article in the Luther, what was it called? The newspaper. Anyway, I wrote in the Luther Concord, yes. I wrote an article, like your name. Wrote an article in the Luther Seminary Concord about playing video games and the spirituality of playing video games. And so now my 11-year-old son and I, Samuel here, who when I was in seminary was my little buddy that walked around. Oh yeah, you were born. Anyway, I like playing video games, and we play together. So that's my making activity.
I love it.
My name's Ashton Wallen, and I use the pronouns she, her. Things that make me happy and fill me up are reading, and I homeschool my kids. So continuing education, like everywhere I can find it, is something that gets me excited. And I'm probably going to teach them too much in homeschooling because I'm always like, let's do that. Let's look it up. Let's go.
That's awesome.
So cool. Okay, so one of the first questions that we wanted to pose for each other on this panel was starting with community called Grace, but you don't have to think about it just with a community called Grace. So this can be a more expansive answer. But what have you experienced in a faith community or in a community called Grace that connects with you? And then further expanding on that, what kinds of communities are you a part of that are really fulfilling for you? Wider communities just out in the world. And this could be, you don't have to think about just right now either. It could be in the past too. What has given you life? Where have you found that connection?
You got it, John.
Sure, why not? So I really enjoy sometimes honestly the spur of the moment decisions that we make in community called Grace. Like I believe it was a random conversation. Pastor Emily's wife, Emily, and I were talking about ice fishing. And I was thinking, well, what if we went out ice fishing and then we were like, well, what if we ice fish as part of a church? And what if we did it as part of community called Grace? And let's have worship out on the ice. And so we had worship out on the ice in February, which was fun and cold.
Very cold.
I'm imagining baptisms happening there is like not the ideal location.
Our grape juice, our communion grape juice froze.
Nice. That sounds like a communion slushie. I think Jesus would have been down for that.
The question was a lot. I'll say what I like, what I feel connected to about community called community. Okay, I'll still go fast.
The spontaneity of it.
I like the LGBTQIA inclusion in community called Grace, but not just that it's inclusion. It's almost like it's like a mundane thing. Like it's not made like this huge spectacular thing. It just is, but in a really welcoming way. I also appreciate it all just kind of feels like we're on the same level and we're just hanging out, but then there's also worship aspect to it. I've noticed my kids feel really comfortable and feel like they are a part of leading the worship, even no one told them they were, and they just decide they are. Whenever Emily asks for a communion assistant, Bridget's always the first one to jump up and happily do it. And I've always loved that my young daughter, my 6-year-old daughter, sees herself in a position to give communion to others. Like it's not a big deal to her. And I like that about community called Grace.
I like one of the things that Pastor Emily brings up a lot is the people who are supposed to be here are here. And as a millennial growing up in the church, I think there's a lot of times where I'm seen as a number. I'm seen as a person. I'm seen almost in a weird way as an object, that the church needs me. So thus we're going to absorb as much of you as you can take. And that doesn't happen here. For me, two of the biggest things I remember my father teaching me was talk is cheap and actions speak louder than words. And I think right now, as I look at the church, I think that's something we're really wrestling with young people. Is what does that actually look like? That I'm not just something that the church needs, that the church embodies that of what my needs are as well.
Thanks, Tyler. Ashton, before you answer, I just want to take a moment to pause and soak that in. First, thanks for your honesty, Tyler. Dr. Kara wasn't wrong when she talked about young people bringing honest reality to our spaces. But also to think about when we shift culture towards growing young and we're excited about prioritizing youth and young people everywhere, that doesn't mean that we're just like, oh, young person, I need to grab them and pull them in and find a place for them immediately, right? It might mean being in relationship first, listening, Another piece that is talked about in the Growing Young book is that the most empathetic churches are the churches that grow young the best. And that means seeing people as people, right? And understanding the humanity, the reality. You've heard up here maybe some values or dreams about community that are either similar to yours or different than what you grew up valuing in community. Or you're like, yeah, that sounds right. I hear that too. And it's important to hear from each other. What do we value in community together? Ashton.
One of the first things that comes to mind about community grace, kind of piggybacking off of some of the things he said, but being seen and heard fully. Sometimes you feel a bit invisible, or you might be heard for a short time, but then it seems to fade. But every time I'm with Community of Grace, love is so present, and I feel seen every time. And that's something I want my kids to have starting out young, instead of having to fix something later, to help them understand the love of God. Because I feel like I picked up a lot of things from church that I had to get over as an adult before I could move on. So I love that my kids are able to get involved in this now. And that love is just everything, and that I'm a skeptic of everything. And I can ask any question. And like John said, you're heard, and it's like normal. And like Tiffany said as well, everything's just normal. I've asked some pretty tough questions in other churches, and it has not gone over well. And I can ask that same question now, and it's no big deal. And I don't go home feeling like I'm actually not a Christian. I actually go home and I still feel like I have a chance, and that Jesus does love me.
I'm going to let that pause and sink in for you all for a moment.
I think I might cry now.
Yeah, we were like... Pastor Emily, I'm wondering if we can do a reframe of one that I hear a lot. You heard Dr. Kara talk about taking Jesus seriously. And another way we hear that often is the phrase spiritual but not religious. Has anyone heard that phrase before? We have a lot of head nods in Bemidji. I'm wondering if you also have head nods in your spaces. But we hear it like young people are spiritual but not religious, or they're religious nuns, meaning N-O-N-E-S. They don't identify directly with a religion. If they were asked about it, they might say, I'm spiritual but not religious. And sometimes that can be a scary thing to hear, or we think like, oh, they don't want anything, young people don't want anything to do with church. But for me, I think that can be heard in a different way. So the question I want us to think about is, what feels like the difference between spirituality and religion for you? What feels different between talking about spirituality or religion? Another way to think about that might be the difference between faith and institution, if that's a helpful reframe for you. And what are the values or roadblocks for you in either of those? So yeah, explore that for yourself. And if that was a lot of words, I'll repeat when it gets to you if you want. But
I lost my train of thought as soon as I grabbed it. My husband here is a very big fan of high church. We've gone to a lot of very formal church settings. So being a community called Grace in Memphis feels interesting. I've also been in settings and in circles with people who identify as spiritual but not religious. And in some ways it feels similar. It feels similar to hanging out and just talking and feeling welcomed. But Community Called Grace does a good job too of incorporating the liturgy and incorporating those elements of church, so that it's not too churchy, but it is churchy. So I was being told to hold it higher. I'm sorry. So those elements, you are just hanging out and you're being accepted, but then you're like, oh yeah, I remember that from church. Yeah, so there's more structure to it. Sometimes when we're with people who are, just spiritual but not religious, it just kind of feels like unfinished. It feels unfulfilling, but Community Called Grace having that structure to it and incorporating those church elements.
So I'm hearing, Tiffany, for you appreciate the spirituality of liturgy, and actually some of the structure is helpful for you.
Absolutely.
In your experience. Awesome.
I want to add that it's awesome that you are reflecting that, because that's something that we've tried to be very intentional about with a Community Called Grace, because one of the things that I believe is that you, in order to reform with authenticity, you need to have solid foundation to stand on. And I do believe in the solid foundation of our Lutheran liturgy and our Lutheran doctrine. And so we have been working really hard on that to create spaces where people can both ask questions, a little bit more loosey-goosey, maybe like our pub theology or pints of grace, where we're not having communion, right? We're not, we may or may not pray depending on how intense the conversation is. But I still consider that a church. That's an opportunity for us to get together and explore faith, and to worship in a way that maybe just doesn't look like what this sort of space facilitates, but there are also parts that do have that component. So thank you for reflecting that.
I would say probably 99% of my friends say that they are spiritual, but not religious. And I think mostly this is because religion, it has a negative, is it connotation now? Mm-hmm. So I don't even think anybody really likes that word. And when I think of that word, I think of like legalistic ideas. So I know it is just a word, but it does hold a lot to us nowadays, and a lot of baggage and trauma that we're going to have to work through as a people together in a community. And yeah, that's all I got on that.
Yeah. No, thanks. That's super helpful.
Yeah, that's real.
I think to the understanding around religion, or even like doctrine that accompanies religion, that legalistic language, it can feel like, even if as a Lutheran theology we are centered in grace, right? It can still feel like the church building or the rigidness of movement through faith spaces has created a culture where it doesn't feel like you can show up in your authentic self all the time. And talking about spirituality, though, when I hear people say like, I'm spiritual, I still hear that there's like a yearning and a need to talk about purpose and meaning and why I'm here and what connects us. And so to Dr. Kara's point about focusing on Jesus, the beautiful piece of that is that we get to center on the why of why we do church together instead of the what. Religion for me is, what does that look like? And Jesus is why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I believe about community called Grace, and that I was actually taught by one of my mentors, who is a mission developer in a recovery community out on the East Coast, is that belonging leads to believing. And so we start with belonging. We start with as safe as the community as you can make. You can never make it completely safe for people, but as honest and open and affirming as possible. And then once people belong, right, once their needs are met, then you can start to explore theology and Jesus and why that matters. But you can't get there if somebody enters a space and feels like they don't see themselves reflected in it at all. So how about this? This is, how much time do we have left? I'll just jump in. I'm going to keep going. So this is I'm excited to hear your answers for this. What is your dream for church? And I'm not talking about for future church, which is like the heaven that's light years away. I'm talking about church right now. Like what would your dream church have, feel like, smell like, taste like, look like, right now in this moment?
That's an easy one for me. I've said it in a few of my other answers already. My dream church welcomes, centers, and accepts kids and kids' busybodies and their activities and what church is for them. And not meaning that they're just, running like crazy, but sometimes children experience church differently. Sometimes they need to wander around, and sometimes they see themselves in the pastor. And I think that's really important. So a church that is able to welcome and accept young kids, young families. You said tastes like, that kind of got me thinking too. I love a good church potluck. So that's what it tastes like to me.
Yes.
I would love an inclusive church that accepts people like me in it to serve.
I agree with him. I have, like I said, with my questions, I have even felt like after they find out the way I think, they don't want me to serve. And so letting people serve of all shapes, size, color, whatever, is amazing. the kids are very important. My kids are what drew me back to church, because I believe that church is the only place, like having a community of people together is how I can show them who God is, that he's real and he's not just make believe. I think it brings something down into something we can touch and feel that is very hard to explain all by yourself.
I'll answer for me quick, and then yeah, a church that I want looks like a church that's real and understands the real world that they live in, right? That we don't like walk into a church to disappear from our identity or to ignore the hard stuff that's happening outside the walls. I think sometimes we crave that because it's like, oh, we're not like talking about the hard stuff here, so we can just like relax. Maybe you talk about the hard stuff in your church. Good for you if you do. But if you're in a church where you're like, we're going to put politics aside so we can just focus on Jesus today, I think you missed the point a little bit. And for me, I need that to be in the church so it doesn't feel like I have to change like the whole reality I'm living in when I walk in and out of it.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and it's something I've thought about a lot over the last, 10 years. I started my podcast as a rebelling against the church because I was frustrated that we weren't talking about important subjects. We weren't talking about how does God's creation impact how my faith is walked out every day? How does the science that we're seeing as juxtaposed against faith really isn't that way? And I didn't hear that enough. So then I filled that void. And it's frustrating how there's so many other issues that need to get talked about, and yet we don't get there. As my day job working with children, youth, and family, I apologized to my seniors this year at the end of the year. And the reason I did is because I see myself in them, and I graduated almost 15 years ago because I still don't feel they're heard in this church. And I struggle as a millennial being heard, I feel, in this church. And I'm in the beast. And that's what's so hard is when I'm having to apologize, I'm sorry that the church doesn't hear you. I'm sorry that the church doesn't see you. I'm sorry that the church doesn't show up for you. Like, you think about, we just went through graduation season. It's the end of the year. You've had sporting events, concerts, art shows. How many people in your congregation went and supported a kid that they weren't related to in the last month? That's what's frustrating, because when I look at my life and how I ended up here, I had people who did that. It's this, that to me, that's part of the simple formula of church. Is people showing up for other people, showing that family. Jesus coming to us, walking among us to show and put flesh and bones on, this is what I want a relationship to look like. That you're there, that you're showing up. And that's where it's frustrating when I'm watching groups of kids where that's hard for them to find that.
Yeah.
And that's when we're having young adults here sitting here, that's a major thing we're looking for. We're looking for something that feels real, not just I show up at whatever time on Sunday morning, and the moment I leave out of that parking lot, I may or may not talk with them the rest of the week. And that's frustrating. Whereas if we have a church where we're talking about those difficult issues, I think there's also a point where we might catch coffee to talk about some of that stuff. Tell me more about that. Where we're able to disarm some of these different ideas, even within church denominations, to be able to sit and talk on, well, where can we agree? And start from there and then discuss our differences, and realizing we might not get anywhere, but realizing in that understanding, we're able to see Christ come through more clearly.
Yeah. Thanks, Tyler.
Ashton, did you have something you wanted to share?
He kind of hit on a lot of it, but I was going to say, I have no problem at all thinking of God as my father, but when I go to the church, I want them to be my family. I want to be adopted into that. A lot of what he's saying, it ends in a lonely feeling where I wish people would send birthday cards like I used to get when I was a kid, or like be able to walk down the street and have people know my kids' names and say, hey, let's make some food. This lady's pregnant, or this family's sick, and like just really dive into each other's lives and know each other's lives. And I think people get lost in it. And I think the perfect church would be literally gaining a whole family that's more perfected even than the ones we're given originally.
I think Cheers had it right. You want to go to a place where everybody knows your name.
All right, well, we have to wrap up, and I want to say a huge thank you. I hope you all heard a church that has existed before, if not in the book of Acts, and maybe even in some of your lives before. And it's a church that can be again. We have a huge call to move forward together from our young people. I hope you heard things that you're like, I think we can make that happen. But also a real witness to the work ahead of us yet to come. We have to wrap up, but a community called Grace, Pastor Emily, all of you, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your realness with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. From Bemidji, I said one of our voting members who I was sitting next to said, there's a lot of aha moments happening right now in the room, and I think that's true, and I'm grateful for your witness, your followership of Jesus Christ, and the ways in which you're living that out as a community called Grace. And so thank you for your important work in ministry. So in a moment, I'm going to invite our Vice President, Sharon Josephson, to come and share our deliberation around our compensation guidelines. Just a few things, and then I think she'll probably reiterate some of these as well. But when we vote, we'll vote all at once with the red and green and white cards, right? We'll just say, let's see your vote, and we'll make a determination. Before we decide what the vote count is, we'll hear from the other three sites. So there may be a slight delay before we announce what the result of voting is. If you wish to speak, you're welcome to do so. You can let Julie Wilson know here in the back, or you can just raise your white card, or your green card if you're speaking for the motion, or your red card if you're speaking against the motion, and we'll invite you to come and have a seat here and speak to the whole assembly, not just here, but the other three sites as well. There's a 2-minute limit, of course, for speakers as usual, and as much as possible, we'll alternate speakers for and against. So with that said, I think we'll move on, and I'll invite Vice President Sharon Josephson to take the chair. Sure. All right, we're going to just take a moment here for the other three sites to receive instructions from their coordinators there at those sites. Just and Julie, give us a thumbs up when you think we're ready. All right.
In my house, this silence would be very uncomfortable. So usually what would happen is my mother would fill in the blank, okay? She'd just talk about anything, which I could do too. All right, the first item of business today, as far as the resolutions are concerned, is the one dealing with compensation guidelines. And the person who is going to read this is a member of the committee, and she is Pastor Linda Molitor, and she is from Reference and Counsel, and she is in Bemidji. So Linda? You can pull that out now.
So on the resolution to adopt the 2024 compensation guidelines.
One of the new people at this assembly thinks that this is going to take 45 minutes to an hour to talk about this. And she thought it might be really quite boring to talk about compensation guidelines. I'm seeing all blank looks out there saying, really? Okay. There will be a good discussion, but it may not be for an hour.
Okay. Therefore, be it resolved that the Northwestern Minnesota Synod and Assembly adopt the following 5 compensation guidelines. 2024 compensation guidelines for ministers of word and sacrament called to congregations or parishes without parsonages. 2024 compensation guidelines for ministers of word and sacrament called to congregation and parishes with parsonages. 2024 compensation guidelines for ministers of word and service. 2024 compensation guidelines for Synod authorized ministers, SAMs. 2024 compensation guidelines for lay church workers.
That motion now is eligible for discussion. Anyone who would like to speak at any one of the areas can go to their hub. Anyone who would like to speak here in Moorhead can come to the front. Yes, and I understand that Pastor Matt Ingham is going to speak first. Go ahead and sit here, Matt is from the committee.
Yes. All right. All I did was nod an agreement every meeting we had, so I guess this is punishment to come up and speak for all of you guys. The 2 things that we made note of for changes, the first was a 4% cost of living adjustment, which was an educated guess that seemed on par with everything that we had seen. And then the second, you can see in the guidelines there, it's highlighted in yellow in all the packets I think that I looked at. The state of Minnesota had made most employers now, they had legislated that they have to offer 12 weeks of parental leave. And so following along those guidelines, it was our recommendation to up our parental leave offer from 8 weeks to 12 weeks as well, to keep in line with the employers of this state.
Thank you.
Question from Pastor Gretchen Enoch.
The next speaker will be from East Grand Forks, Gretchen Enoch.
Hello, friends. Yeah. Okay, I'll just talk right here. My name is Gretchen. I try again.
Trying again. Perfect. Hello, friends. My name is Pastor Gretchen Enoch, and I joyfully serve at Fisher Bigland Parish. And I just have a point of clarification about the Mutual Ministry Committee. I have had a tremendous experience in my 28 years of ministry working with mutual ministry teams. And at this point at Fisher Bigland, we don't have a tradition of having a mutual ministry committee or team. And so I'm finding that it's my responsibility to provide education and form the team and sort of herd the cats with this. And I'm wondering how within the Synod, what other resources there are in addition to this wonderful book that is a resource, knowing that the purpose of the Mutual Ministry Committee is to affirm and strengthen the mission efforts of the congregation or parish and the ministry, which is performed by the staff. And I found that it's really shown to enhance the health of the congregation to form this sort of committee. And I've gathered some people, but I'm just wondering how, with the Synod's help, can we do it better? It's in the Constitution, but I just don't hear a lot of other congregations in this area partaking in this opportunity of small group ministry of a mutual ministry committee. Thank you.
I will answer by inviting my colleague Janelle Netland to come to the microphone there in East Grand Forks.
Comments? Any other questions? Any other discussion? From any of the other hub sites? Seeing no one asking to be recognized, at this point, if there's no further discussion, we will. We're going to wait for, sorry, Bill and I miscommunicated up here. We're going to wait for Janelle. She's in Bemidji, so it'll be another pause here.
Okay, Bishop Tesh.
We have Pastor Janelle.
I'm here in East Grand Forks, and I will follow up with Pastor Gretchen about the resources that we can provide for Mutual Ministry Committee and how that can be in best in her context. We do have some extra resources, so if the church at whole is asking these questions, we will do some follow-up. Please reach out to me and we can do that kind of work together. So thank you for that question, and we will get the resources out to better contextualize this in the different congregations in our Synod.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Janelle. Is there any other discussion? Any other questions? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, at each site now, if you would raise, if you're in favor of the compensation guideline resolution, raise your green card. If you're opposed, raise your red card. This requires a simple majority. Okay, thank you. Moorhead can put the cards down. And now we'll just wait. Okay, the other sites have also voted in the affirmative, so that motion, that resolution has passed. Thank you.
This last year, our Synod Council had extensive discussion around how we support and fund theological education. And this happened in parallel with conversations that my staff and I have been having with Bishop Craig Loya of the Episcopal Church in Minnesota and his staff around some kind of shared ministry with Indigenous people on the White Earth Indian Reservation, a ministry that would involve formation of leaders, in many cases theological formation, with the hope that one might eventually serve in word and sacrament ministry, or perhaps in the future go on to seminary. But some way in which we can come together as mostly European descent Christians with siblings in Christ who are Indigenous people living in our part of the world, rub shoulders and learn together, and discover from one another how God is showing up in our lives and what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ in this part of the world in the 21st century, as people across perceive differences. And so we had these discussions for really over the course of the last year with Synod Council and with the leaders of the Episcopal Church, and finally made a recommendation for a major change in our budget, which is probably the biggest change. And if you attended one of the information meetings, or if you looked closely at the Synod budget, you noticed it, which is a significant reduction in the amount of our mission support dollars that are directed towards Luther Seminary, and moving about 2/3 of those dollars toward this shared ministry with the Episcopal Church. We're just in the early phases of that ministry, really doing exploratory work with the help of a community organizer, but to pave the way for that, to make that change in the budget this year. I called Bishop Steinke, President, I'm sorry, I wouldn't do that to you, Reverend Dr. Robin Steinke, to talk about this, and we had a lovely conversation, because one of the things that I was concerned about, and also our Synod Council was concerned about, was that we might find other ways to partner and to support theological education, especially Luther, in our region here, because just acknowledging that the way that theological education is funded in this church has changed dramatically. So how can we as a synod live fully into that reality by making opportunities to give to that important ministry available to all of us, while also looking for other ways to partner? And I said to Robin, this might be a little controversial for us, because people love the seminary, and she said, well, why don't I come? And I said, well, this would be a great way for us to demonstrate that continued partnership. So it's my honor to introduce Reverend Dr. Robin Steinke here at the Moorhead site. She has been has joined Luther Seminary back in 2014, has been a really innovative and amazing leader there, has a long resume, most impressive of which I think is that she got her PhD in Cambridge, England, which I'm just always, I would like to hear your attempt at a British accent at some point. So anyway, without further ado, please welcome Luther Seminary President, Dr. Robin Steinke.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful assembly in 4 locations, and I'm in this location here in Moorhead. It's wonderful to be with you all. I want to share 3 things in 5 minutes. First, the sense of resources and that we are trying to make available as the whole church is asking the kind of questions that you all have been thinking and talking about here today. Second is I want to invite you into an experiment. And third, I want to say a word of gratitude. So first, what are the resources that we have that we're continuing in this kind of rubric of listen to what's happening in congregations across the church? What are the struggles? What are the heartaches? What are the hopes, as we heard our young people talk about what kind of church they want? We think it's our task as a seminary of this church to listen, to act, and to share. So I'm really excited about the experiment that you all are doing with an Indigenous community here on this territory, because we want to listen and learn from what you're doing. We want to tell the story of Jesus for this strange new time through that listen, act, and share. Another way that we do that is through our digital publishing. I'm not going to read what's on the slide. The slides will be available to you. And we have 3 different links for you that describe the kind of resources that we have. I know many of you use the resource Working Preacher if you've got to preach during the week, whether you're a lay person or a pastor or a deacon. You've got wonderful resources there. Enter the Bible is also great. And what's not listed there is God Pause, which is a daily devotion, comes every day, whether you ask for it or not. And once you sign up, it just comes. It's a little bit like, well, I was going to say grits in the South, but you don't ask for it, they just come. The other project that we have is called Faith Meet Academy. And this is where we simply want to share the story of what God is doing and connect people with relationship with the living God. And that's through sharing the stories of Jesus, just as we heard earlier today. But it's also cultivating relationships with each other. I love that image on the panel with the young people that Jesus's greatest miracle was having friends at age 33. That just haunts me, let me tell you. And if you get close and you understand this relationship with Jesus, you can't but help practice justice. And then reimagining the church from what we think is more clergy-led, lay-supported to lay-led, clergy-supported. The other thing we've discovered is the need to host deep questions, to host spaces for people to ask deep questions, whether you're a pastor, a deacon, a church council member, or a lay leader. So we've curated some spaces, whether it's individual coaching or conversations together with folks like yourselves who are wondering about some of the same things, so that we can set the table to really host these deep questions. The other thing we've discovered is that, this may come as a surprise, we don't have all the answers. We are not here shoving resources out to the church to say, here's how we fix this. So we're finding in this posture of listen, act, share, that we need to listen to the far edges of the church. An example of that in this thing we call the Seeds Project is 4 years ago now, we started a small project inviting some folks who what we thought were doing edges or ministry at the very edges. So this young fellow was a professional gamer, 20-something, and has a passion for Jesus. And so in his professional gaming life, one day the avatars got frozen in the game in the cemetery. So this young guy thinks, wow, what a great space to tell the story of Jesus with all these avatars in the cemetery. Can you tell? I have never played a professional game like that in my life. So this young man who has a passion for Jesus wants to tell the story to these other professional gamers. The game freezes. He starts telling stories out of the Gospel of Mark. The game unfreezes, and these other avatars say, wow, this was really interesting. Can we do this again? And so every week they meet these avatars in this cemetery and talk about Jesus. I don't know what or how that works, but I want to come alongside this young guy and help him resource his ministry in ways that he tells us would be helpful, because I think God is at work in some new ways and we want to listen in. The other thing is I want to invite you into an experiment. For all the synods in Region 3, which would be the whole of Minnesota, the 2 synods in North Dakota, and the South Dakota Synod, it's a graduate certificate experiment. So you might say, well, why would we want to do something like that? Not just to strengthen our partnership, but also to raise up leadership for the church. Because it may surprise you, pastors and deacons don't come from the seminary. They come from your congregations and your communities and the relationships that you are building. And we want to strengthen that and lower some barriers. And so we've designed a graduate credit 8-course certificate program. And we've got a sample 2-year pathway for those of you who are interested. And you might say, well, who would do this? For whom is this designed? It's designed for synodically authorized ministers. Maybe you're a lay leader who's having to preach on a regular basis and you just want a bit more robust background. Or maybe you really want to be a deacon or a pastor, but you never had the chance to get a bachelor's degree. And so here's a pathway for you. Or maybe you're just a few courses shy from a master's degree and will accompany you in this. We're going to provide scholarships at the rate of 100% tuition for everybody in Region 3. It's designed to be 2 years part-time, or could also be an on-ramp to a degree program. The next step, if you're curious or if you know someone for whom that might be a good fit, talk with your synod staff, contact the seminary at the link that's provided for you in the deck. So that's resources with Faith Lead, the invitation to the experiment, and now the gratitude, the thank you. Mission support and the impact that your support of Luther Seminary has made it possible for us to do this kind of work. We reach between 5 and 8 million leaders and learners in 248 countries on an annual basis because of your partnership and support. And we need your experimentation, your work in creative listening in this context, and to feed that back to us. So I'm 100% supportive and so appreciative of this synod, and especially to you, Bishop Tesh, for the invitation to come and think with you about what God is doing and how the Holy Spirit is working and stirring. Because together we can learn some things about what God is up to. So I want to thank you, and may the Holy Spirit bless you and your ministries together and the flourishing of the gospel in this place. Thank you.
Thank you, President Steinke. Look forward to partnering with you more in the future to raise up leaders for our church.
Thank you so very much. And thank you for having faith in us to be part of your experiment, the experiment here and the experiment that you're embarking on at Luther. So you all heard that. That's exciting news. So spread that news as you go. The next item of business is the introduction of our treasurer, Chris, and he will lead us through the budget and some of the financial reports.
Do you want to stand or sit?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here and to talk just briefly about our finances of the just finished fiscal year and then looking ahead a little bit. So just want to comment on how we finished up the past year, which ended at the end of January. So in that fiscal budget year, which we revised, I guess at least 2 times. We had 2 major revisions of that budget. We projected and we approved operating in a deficit position. So when we put that budget into effect, We said we're not sure exactly how this is going to end up, but we're going to try and do what we want to do and see how it comes out. There were some modifications to that, and one of the, we also had a safety net underneath that, in the sense that we had some monies that we had gotten from the government PPP, Payroll Protection Plan, that we had come to the Synod. We had not used them at that point in time. So that was kind of our safety net. But the long and the short of the whole story is that we actually ended up a little bit in the black by about $13,000. So that was good news for the budget year that just ended. I also want to just say a brief word about the audit of that year. Every year, we have a committee from the council that oversees the audit process. We use the Widmer Roll firm in Fargo. And just to report to you that that audit for this past year has been completed. It is a clean audit, which is what the term that they use, and that we want to hear. For any one of you who really kind of gets into that sort of stuff and wants to read all 24 pages of it, just send me a note. We'll pass it along. Actually, it was on the website. It is on the website. So you can actually download the final copy of that and take it to bed with you tonight. It'll help after a busy day. So then our business today, in one sense, what we need to vote on is the preliminary budget for the coming fiscal year. And that is titled Fiscal Year 2025, because of where our fiscal year ends in January of 2025, which will start basically next February. So we're going to talk about, we're going to approve a budget that starts next February and runs through the fiscal year 2025. And that's what is up on the screen there. It's 2025 versus 2024. And I'm sure that if I can't read it from here, you can't read it either. So, but at any rate, but first of all, let me just say, in all sincerity, these are not secret documents. These are not held only for the council or the executive committee. You are welcome to have these documents right as they come out of the accounting system. And in fact, as a result of one of the pre-sessions that we had the week before, there was a question that came that we were able to address and provide the information. So an email, a phone call, or whatever will get that information for you, whatever that has been helpful. So as we look at this budget that we're going to vote on, we are going to move that budget from, again, a slight deficit. The current one that we're operating in right now has about a $17,000 deficit bottom line for the whole fiscal year. And then the new one that we're going to vote on actually is projecting a positive $12,000 bottom line. That includes things like the 3% increases, cost of living increases that will go to our staff. It includes things like what Bishop Bill and President Robin were talking about when it comes to the changes that are going to go in effect to Luther Seminary. And just a short word on that, when historically, we've been sending roughly $60,000 to $65,000 during the fiscal year to Luther's Seminary. And we're going to basically reduce that as we're moving ahead down to about 20,000. And then we're going to take that 40,000 in that area that Bishop Bill was talking about to use with our Indigenous leadership programming with our partners in the Episcopal Church. So the dollars don't change don't change substantially. There's really only a 0.3% change in that area of the budget we call partners in mission ministry overall, but internally, that's where we're making the changes in that Partners for Mission ministry line. I would invite questions, comments, concerns.
What we have is I have a request from Pastor Mark Olson in Bemidji to address the treasurer and to the group. Pastor Mark.
Good afternoon. That's an interesting look. Pastor Mark Olson, Faith Lutheran in Bagley. Point of order. I'm trying to find item 35 on the budget, the ministry or the partners in ministry, where I can see that line items of all those partners reflected in the breakdown, and I can only get the general item 35. I'm very supportive of the change of the funding and how we're shifting it from Luther. I just want to see the real numbers and how that affects all of our partners in ministry, if I could, please.
Sure, Mark. Yeah. Mark, let me just give you a quick breakdown on what that partners in ministry area contains. It's the monies that go to our ELCA colleges, Lutheran Advocacy Minnesota, the campus ministry at Bemidji, the campus ministry at M-State here in Moorhead, the work with Luther Seminary, the Episcopal Diocese of Minnesota, the Minnesota Council of Churches, the Oak Grove Lutheran School, the Parish Nurse Program, the Synod Outreach Ministries, People's Church, the Native Neighbors Table, and the Way. The Way is is the new name of what we used to talk about as the Native American church ministry. So that's basically what makes up that one line, partners in ministry.
Are there any other questions or any other comments that anyone would like to make in regard to the budget? I see no one in Moorhead. Is there anyone in other locations? Yes, Julie says there is. The chair recognizes Pastor Rebel for comments from Bemidji.
Are we good? Yes. Sharon, if you could give us a thumbs up, that would be super, that you can hear us. I'm going to assume that you can hear us, and what I want to answer is, I think that Pastor Mark will appreciate knowing this information, is this year we did make a change to the partners in ministry because prior to this year, People's Church, Native Neighbors Table, and The Way were not in this budget. So it was a question every year of percentage-wise, how much we had and how much they could have. And this felt so much better with our mission of who we are and walking with people, that they would be in this budget in this way, and it would more reflect our mission of walking with our neighbors.
Still looking for a point of order. Again, Mark Olson.
Are there any other comments or questions?
I am still looking for a breakdown on the partners in ministry. I understand what all those partners are, and it's great. In my former life, I served as the chair of the finance committee in the Northeast Minnesota Synod Council. I just want to see how much is allocated to all of our partners. So how much goes to People's Church? How much, what's the dollar figure for the Way? What's the dollar figure for Luther Seminary? Is that available, that breakdown?
Yes, Mark, it is available. I can send you this full spreadsheet. You can see it that way. Do we want to take the time to read through them now? Okay. How about if we get our technical folks to help us and put that up on the screen?
What I would like to do now is invite a motion to table until a time certain, which would be after resolution 3 or 2. Okay, the motion has been made. Is there a second? There's a second. In other sites, we do have a maker and a second here. All those in favor, put up your green. All those opposed, put up the red card. Okay, we need a count from the other sites. Julie, do you have that? Not yet. Is it fine? Wade Dutton. Okay, that has been tabled then until after the second resolution. Thank you.
You want to take that to Ryan and he can get it up. Is this yours? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. All right, thank you. So we'll get that detail up on the screen, and in the meantime, we'll move on to other business, and then we'll have to vote to bring that resolution back to the floor. So just so you understand how things are unfolding here. So next on item of business is the elections of Synod Council and the Consultation Committee and the Discipline Committee. There's a full ballot, and the nominations ceased on Wednesday at noon, and there were no new nominations received. And so we will proceed to entertain a unanimous ballot for that, for the nominations that have been made. Can we get the ballot up on the screen? Okay. Is that, and that's in their packet or in the, okay. All right.
Should be by affirmation, not unanimous.
Yeah. All right, so I understand that. Well, I'll just go ahead and read the ballot. So for Vice President, Sharon Josephson. For the conference representatives on the Synod Council, Pastor Stephanie White from Conference 2, rostered minister, first term. Diane Mostad, Conference 4, layperson, first term. Pastor Kayla Billings, Conference 4, rostered minister, first term. Robert Stein, Conference 5, layperson, second term. Beth Monkey, Conference 7, a layperson, first term. Nola Smith, Conference 8, layperson, first term. at-large representatives, Willard Hebert, at-large underrepresented population, first term, John Halverson, at-large underrepresented population, first term, and Pastor Eric Miller, at-large underrepresented population, first term. For the Consultation Committee, 1 6-year term with no consecutive reelection, Pastor David Fleener, Greg Tverdick, Mary Peterson. On the Discipline Committee, also a 6-year term with no consecutive reelection, Jerry Peterson, Pastor PJ Moline, Larry Kent, Pastor Kristen Osterkamp, Pastor Doug Stavy, Pastor Phil Tobin, Pastor Caitlin Jensen Brown, and that fulfills the full slate of candidates. I would entertain a motion to affirm this slate of candidates. Pastor Wade Dutton has made the motion. Is there a second? It's seconded over here by John Wold. All right. Shall we proceed to vote? I'm going to just assume you don't want to talk about it. Am I right or am I wrong? All right. Pastor Wade says I'm right, but if you do want to speak to it, you can. All right. So please, if you are in favor of the motion, raise your green card. Those opposed, raise the red. And Deacon Julie will let us know when the other sites have given their thumbs up. I'm going to judge that it passed here. All right, so we have a new slate of leaders for the Synod Council and the Consultation Committee and the Discipline Committee. So let's thank them for their service. We'll proceed now to the resolution number 3, which is the Creation Care Resolution. And I will call upon Pastor Linda Molitor from the Referencing Council to read the resolves of this resolution from Bemidji.
Resolved. Am I on? Resolved that the Northwestern Minnesota Synod in Assembly strongly encourage all congregations of the Synod to accept their responsibility to be stewards of the earth and pledge to growth faithfully and intentionally in this responsibility as individuals and as anticipatory communities within the Synod by worshiping in ways that celebrate and foster care for creation, educating adults and children about biblical and theological foundations for creation care, ecological issues, and community practices, improving energy conservation efforts in church buildings and on their grounds, promoting earth-friendly practices of members at home and work, demonstrating care for creation in their local communities, and advocating for energy policies at the state and national levels that will foster cleaner, renewable, and more efficient energy use in all sectors of society. And be it further resolved that the Synod Council appoint a creation care task force to provide leadership and oversight of this pledge and to work with partner groups. Example, Arbor Day Foundation, Blessed Tomorrow, Center for Climate Justice and Faith, Citizens Climate Lobby, Echo Faith Network of Minnesota Synods, Honor the Earth, Land Stewardship Project, Lutheran Advocacy Minnesota, Lutherans Restoring Creation, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the Nature Conservancy, University of Minnesota Extension, and others for its fulfillment.
Thank you, Pastor Linda. Are we able to display the resolves? Okay, we'll just wait a moment while those go up on the screen. Thank you for your patience in this new style of Synod Assembly that we're experimenting with today. You're all, you will hear in my report how much I appreciate the spirit of adventure and experimentation in this Synod. All right, so the resolves are before you. So this, just a little bit, before we move, take action, just so that you understand the source of this resolution. It was drafted by the Creation Care Affinity Group, which is one of our many affinity groups that meets here in northwestern Minnesota. And under the guidance of an executive coach that we work with for each of those affinity groups. They drafted this resolution that was based on other resolutions that have come before other assemblies. And then it was brought to the conference assemblies at our Great Northwestern Minnesota Synod get-together in March. And at those conference assemblies, it was mostly talked about. One conference passed it and brought it. So this originates from Conference 8, and it comes before you from that conference. So this, the other two resolutions that we've begun to work on as an assembly did not require a motion and a second because they originated from the Synod Council. This resolution does require a motion and a second because it originates from another source besides the Synod Council. So is there anyone moving this resolution? Resolution has been moved by Pastor Grant Vanderford. Seconded, sir, I don't know your name. Gary Gordon? Gorham. Oh, any relation to the guy who the street's named after in Madison, Wisconsin? Oh, all right. Okay. All right. Okay. So the motion has been made and seconded. Are there any speaking to the motion? Yes. Pastor Laurel, we want to come up and speak from up here? Yep. Please state your name and where you serve. Yes.
I'm Pastor Laurel Ivers. I serve First Lutheran Church in Detroit Lakes. And 3 years ago, the members at First Lutheran Church started discussing what we could do to care for God's gift of our good creation in ways that would make a difference in our climate emergency. We had help from the work of Lutherans Restoring Creations, from other synods in the ELCA, from other churches and organizations, and we developed and we presented a covenant for creation to our Church Vision Council for their signing, and which after some good discussion, they did. And our creation care team then launched book studies, forums on recycling, sustainable gardening, electric vehicle events. We held annual creation care worship services, participated in Earth Day events, hosted intergenerational hands-on creation care education, developed a pollinator garden, gave away free trees to the community every year. And every Sunday and Wednesday, our worship bulletins have new tips on ways to care for creation in our world. This is making a difference in the awareness for our congregation and in our homes and in our community. And it's making a difference in the generations who are following us. I believe that Resolution 2 provides the network for practical encouragement that all the churches in our synods can receive from each other to support us in the work of stewarding God's good creation. I encourage you to vote for this resolution. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others speaking to the motion? Okay. There's a point of order or a question, sir? I'm sorry, but amendments are out of order. The deadline for amendments was noon on Wednesday. Now, There is a way you can do this, which is we would have to vote to change the rules of the assembly, which would require a 2/3 vote of the assembly. So if you wish to make an amendment, I guess it depends on how much you wish to make this amendment. You can do so, but first you would have to make a motion to suspend the rules of the assembly in order for us to be able to change the rules to allow you to offer a substantive motion to this resolution. So while you think about that, we're going to have another speaker. Is that all right, sir? All right. So I believe we have a speaker. Is there someone speaking against the resolution? Okay. Both are speaking for. Okay, before we have you speak, can we just ask if there is anyone in the assembly, either here in Moorhead or in any of the other 3 sites, who wishes to speak against the motion? Because we want to alternate if possible. Not hearing or seeing anyone come forward, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to speak. Please say your name and where you're from, your congregation, and then go ahead and speak. You have 2 minutes.
I don't know. Yeah, am I in the echo chamber? Yeah. You are there. Okay. You're gonna get up maybe. Okay. I'm Pastor Crail Stringer, chaplain at Pioneer Care Retirement Community here in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. And I'm speaking in favor of this resolution. And just a brief comment. The poet Maya Angelou once encouraged people by saying, if God can put the rainbow right in the clouds, you can be a rainbow in somebody's cloud. To my understanding, Christ is the fulfillment of God's everlasting rainbow covenant with every creature on earth. There are so many clouds in our world today, but no storm clouds are so pervasive and threatening as climate change, which affects every aspect of community as we experience it. Economic, social, political, environmental, health. This resolution is God's call to the churches to be a clear voice of sharing God's love with the world. And I urge you all to vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I understand there's another person speaking for the motion from that same site in Bemidji, or no, I'm sorry, from the Bemidji site. You were speaking from Fergus Falls, weren't you, Pastor Crail? Before we do that, are there any that would speak against the motion? Not seeing any or seeing any on my text stream. Let's go ahead and hear from Tyler in Bemidji. Please say your name and what church where you worship.
My name is Tyler Bublitz. I am from First Lutheran in Bemidji. I want to just take one moment to reference that this was from churchwide from 1993, that we initially made these commitments. I was 1 year old when that commitment was made. It's very frustrating for me as a church that it's taking 30 years for us to start making movement. If we are a church that is going to commit to young people and young-ish adults like myself, we need to be able to take these types of concerns seriously and move faster than in 30 years to get a statement on what our synod is about for our churches to start making more movement. I would recommend that you vote in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others speaking to the resolution? Sir, did you get your concern addressed? Okay, thank you.
Maybe so that the rest of you know how we dealt with that issue. In a resolution, when you have parentheses at the end in the whereas clauses, there are parentheses that start with EG, and then they list a whole bunch of different organizations that you can partner with. We can include other organizations with that as well when that committee is actually appointed. So that's the resolution that we had of the issue over there, because he had another good organization, countywide soil and water districts, right? So we will make sure that they're included in the mix as well. And you should know on the state level, other synods are working on these activities very much in the same way that, that we're maybe embarking on, depending upon the vote. And Northeast and St. Paul synods are the ones that are taking leadership roles in this activity. So.
Thank you. And thank you, sir. Thank you, Vice President Sharon. And I believe we have one more speaker. I think we have time for, in terms of our limit of debate, for one more speaker from Bemidji. And please introduce yourself and your congregation.
Hey, thank you so much for taking my my voice here. I am Pastor Daphne Urban from North Beltrami Evangelical Lutheran Parish in Black Duck and Kellier. And I'm currently a member of our Creation Care Affinity Group in our Synod. This resolution and this group is about becoming more educated about what it means to be co-creators of this earth with God. It means being more aware of what being a steward of God's creation means and sharing that knowledge with people in our families, congregations, and beyond. It is about sharing different perspectives on doing things and listening to others. What is working and what isn't when it comes to taking care of our planet, God's entire creation, and sharing that knowledge with others. So far in our group, I have met Creation Care friends and faith people from all over the state, and it's been very amazing. This is our one planet. Don't we want to help continue to make it a great place to live for all future generations to come? We can do that by continuing to learn new things and sharing that new knowledge with others. And implementing suggested changes can only happen if you say yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any others speaking to the motion? If not, we'll proceed to vote. So remember, green means yes, red means no. You may vote now. Please hold your cards up. All right, here in the Moorhead site, you may put them down, and we'll wait to hear the results from the other sites. All right, so it's all green at the other two sites as well. So the motion, the resolution has passed. And I'd like to thank the Creation Care Affinity Group for their work on this resolution. It's not all green. There were votes against at both sites. All right. A few red at each site. All right, so I'm gonna invite Sharon Josephson to come back to the microphone to help us work through the questions about the budget. And I believe Chris is ready with some information for us too.
The reason why we postponed to a time certain is because we could get up on the screen exactly what the breakdown is of that one category. So Chris, I'll turn it back to you to answer any questions. If you have questions, here in Moorhead, you can indicate and then come forward. If you're in another location, please go to your hub.
So there's a little bit of context here. There's 4 columns of numbers. The current budget we're voting on is on the far right, that the greenish looking column. But actually what you're looking at there is the actuals for our just finished current fiscal year in the white on the far left. Then we've got the budget for that year. Then we've got the budget for this year, current. And then on the far right, what we're proposing for in the budget we're voting on. So if I were to read down those numbers, if you can, I think you can see, but I'll just read them just to make sure that they're clear. Reading from top to bottom on the far right column. 1645, 2900, 2900, 28,200, 28,200 for our campus ministries. Luther Seminary, 20,000. Episcopal Diocese, 45,000. Minnesota Council of Churches, 9,400, 1150, 500, 10,000 in Synod Outreach Ministries, and then 3 lines of $5,000. People's Church, Native Neighbors Table, and The Way.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions from the other sites? Until this time. Okay, seeing no one approaching anyone. Is there one? Who is it? Here?
Mark Olson in Bemidji.
I recognize Pastor Mark Olson in Bemidji.
Can you see me? Mark Olson, Faith Lutheran Bagley. Remind me next year to be sure to trim my nose hairs before I end this. I speak in favor of this budget. I'm thrilled to see the partnership with the Episcopal Church. If Dr. Steinke is still in the building in Moorhead, we have wonderful opportunities up here in northern Minnesota for interfaith and ecumenical collaboration. Often, and for good reason, we focus on interfaith relationships with our Jewish or Muslim partners, but also here in northern Minnesota, we have traditional Ojibwe, Medewan, folks who follow in traditional spirituality, and the opportunity to be engaged in interfaith dialogue here, and particularly in areas of creation is wonderful. I invite you, Dr. Steinke, to bring your faculty and bring your students here to attend a powwow, to stay overnight at the People's Church, to attend tribal council meetings, which aren't really all that different than congregational or synod council meetings. Come sing with our Ojibwe singers, study and learn how we are working ecumenically in interfaith ways here. United Church of Christ has the Damascus Project. The Episcopal Church in Minnesota has Total Ministry in the School for Formation. The Northeastern Minnesota Synod has a School of Formation. We've got our School of Lay Ministry. We've got our School for Lay Ministry. Let's all do that together. We can do ecumenical interfaith theological education. In northern Minnesota, our Native folks have some of the largest gaps in terms of healthcare, infant mortality, and so forth. But our biggest need is opportunity gaps and achievement gaps in education. And theological education is at the head of that list. Thank you. I speak in favor of the budget.
Thank you, Pastor Mark. Are there any other comments? I don't see any. The reason why we can do it the way we are doing it without having a vote to take it off the table and all that is because we passed a motion for time certain after the second resolution. So anyone who's a parliamentary procedure person That's the reason we can do it this way. So here, seeing no other discussion, no other questions to come forward at any of the locations, we will now come to a vote. It's a simple majority. Those who are in favor raise their green card. Those opposed, their red card. Okay, you can put your cards down in Moorhead. Julie is going to tell us what the other side said. Is it okay? All right, the motion has passed. Thank you.
All right, how about a stretch break? 15 minutes. Come back at 5 minutes to 3 or 2:55. That's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the British say it differently. Yeah. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but okay, 14 at 14:55. Come on back. All right, thank you.